Welcome everyone. This is the Heroes Podcast, and I've got Stuart Webb here from the UK. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing very well, Andre. Very pleased to be with you. Thank you very much for inviting me on today.
Well, I'm very excited to have you because of the story that you will bring us. But before we go into that, I will intro you so everyone knows who we are meeting today. Stuart is an entrepreneur, mentor, author, and a podcast host focused on sales, marketing, transformational leadership, and business scaling. He has experience with influential brands and growth-oriented startups, particularly those led by technically skilled individuals. With a background as a scientist, you won't believe this. He's been researching with the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. So we'll talk about that as well. But wow, what a background you've got. Do you want to take us back to the beginning? If you had a hard start around as a child, or how did you end up being an entrepreneur and researcher? Strange.
Yeah, let me. Yeah. So I was I was a scientifically interesting child. I had theories about why everything worked the way it did. Even I can remember at sort of 5, 6, 7 years old, I had theories as to why things worked, and I was always very curious about taking things apart and finding out how they came together. And so obviously at school, I was I did well at school. I did all the right exams and did all the right things and achieved well at school. And so obviously at the school that I was at, it was suggested to me that I should enter into something sort of scientific or medicine. So I was pushed in that direction from a young child. And it was an easy sell to me because that's where I wanted to go. I was very fortunate that I ended up at the university that I did because it was exactly the right course for me. And I enjoyed it. I loved every minute of it. And from the very moment that I sort of, I left school and started on that career, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. There was no doubt in my mind, Andre, I was going off to become a scientist. I was going to do research. I was going to investigate things. And it's great when you have that belief in yourself and your drive to do that. What I came up against, and you were right, I ended up working in the laboratories where at the time that I was working, they were just starting up the research, but they were researching how to create the vaccines, which eventually went on to create some of those vaccines in 2019, 2020. I was absolutely, I loved my degree. The one thing that came up against me, or the one thing that I discovered about myself, was I had lots of very interesting thoughts. People would say to me, you have just got these amazing ability to pull different strands together and find connections between them. I couldn't actually implement any of that. I was not great when it came to actually doing the experiment at the bench, as it were, doing the experiment with my hands. I just hadn't got the attention span. I was told many years later I probably suffer, and I've still suffered with ADHD, but whatever. I just couldn't actually end up doing the experiments as well as they needed to be done. There were better people than me to do that. And it became one of those, this is going to stifle and prevent me from taking my career where I want it to go. And that was a huge moment for me when I was stuck and realized that all of this drive that I had, everything that had carried me forward from 9 through to by now 29, 30, this had started to impact me. I was at this stage, I think I was 32, so I'd been doing research about 10 years. And so therefore, here I was stuck on this precipice, if you like. I had got where I'd got. I'd been on the international stage talking to international scientific audiences. I had published papers. I had been told what brilliant ideas I had, and then somebody sat me down and said, you're going to really struggle to go to the next career because you can't focus on anything. You're all over the place, and you don't do the experiments in the way which actually gets you the results they should. And that was my sudden realization that suddenly this was never going to work for me. I just didn't realize that I was not going to be able to do what I wanted to do. And indeed, in order to sort of go to the next stage, which was become a principal investigator and build a lab in a university situation, was going to be hugely difficult for me. And you can imagine that belief, the drive I had at that point, sort of fell away. And I sat almost for many months and thought, what is my life about? What am I going to do now? This is never going to happen for me. And you can imagine the sort of huge change that produces in somebody. It destroys your self-esteem. It destroys your self-worth, because you suddenly realize what you believe about yourself isn't true. And it was a dreadful time. I did actually continue in universities for another 3 years after that. And I continued in those universities because I was trying to find my next thing. As I sort of wound my way out of what had been a driving force for the last, nearly, by that stage, very nearly 20 years.
Would you say you have lost your identity almost? Because you've been...
At that stage, yes.
Wow. And what has that caused you emotionally, or how did you cope?
So this is where the switch comes in. I was fortunate that I went to a university where they wanted somebody who could help other scientists understand potential new technologies. So I had this joint role, which was part talking to scientists already and part looking at new technologies that could help them. And I came across this thing called the World Wide Web. I came across a guy called Tim Berners-Lee. And Tim Berners-Lee had just started talking about something. I found it and I actually reached out to him. I found a way. In those days, it wasn't so easy to do email, but I found a way of reaching Tim in his place of work. And I asked him some questions about this World Wide Web thing. And that was the beginning of a new identity. I sort of, if you like, sort of turned around and said, I think there's some great ideas in amongst this, Tim. I think it could be used for teaching medical students, which is what I was into at that stage. Talk to me about how I set up one of these things in my university. And that's how I set up one of the first servers in this country. And it was that gave me a new impetus. So if you like, I had a new project. Now it's right, how do I use this stuff in order to make the next thing work in my life? And that re-sparked my ability to go, okay, my identity had been in a science, as a scientist doing this research about viruses and DNA and the things which I truly believed in. Now I had a new identity, and that new identity was, okay, I can now make changes and I can do things for other people, but I'm now using other people's technology in the same way that I'd been using other people's ideas. So I discovered a new drive, and that led to more challenges and more changes.
I'm wondering, are you still following sort of the research of the vaccine research at all? You still have that still going in the background?
Yes, I can't help it. I still spend a lot of my time reading, talking to, and understanding the latest scientific challenges, the latest scientific work, and intellectually it still fascinates me. And it probably was one of the influences upon my son, who's recently taken up a role in the medical research field. And I can imagine that it's probably sitting listening to me because it's still there. So yes, it does. But I've used the techniques, the thoughts, the thinking that I used to employ as a scientist now in my business career. And that is how I now express my my science, my scientific curiosity, if you like.
Wow, what a change. I can't hold myself back. I tried, but I need to ask this question. There has been so controversial information about that vaccine, whether it's made by anyone. Like, is there anything you could tell us that, was this necessary? Was it not? Was this really helping? Or
So
tell me something that you know, and maybe we outsiders, not technically challenged, let's say, not scientific enough. What was happening?
So I think there are two things that I'll just highlight, which is important to remember about. Well, let's talk about the fact that I now employ these same thinking processes, these same approaches to help the business people that I now help to grow their businesses and scale their businesses. The first is, you don't know anything until you run an experiment. You might think you know, but you don't know. So in the same way that a scientist says, I got an idea, let me run an experiment to find it out. A business person says, I think there's a market for this, but you have to run an experiment to find out if you're right. And the problem is that I think too many of us believe we should know, or not if we should know, but we shouldn't have to admit to ourselves, this one is going to be a trial balloon, or this is going to be uncomfortable for a while because I sit in the knowledge that I don't know what I'm doing. Now, that's something that's not comfortable for a lot of people. I'm comfortable with it because that was my training. The training as a scientist was be uncomfortable. It was to say, I don't know, I'm going to go find out. And if I don't know for the next 2 years, I don't know. That's just the way it is. But I know I'm going on a journey learning. For a lot of scientists, that's just the way it is. For a lot of business people, and for politicians in particular, being in the I don't know, I'm still trying to find out is not only uncomfortable, it is not acceptable, because the public expects people to know. They want certainty, and we don't have certainty. What we have is the management of uncertainty. So I think as a scientist, I was happy with that. As a business person, I'm unhappy. I'm not happy. I'm almost not happy if I know. I'm constantly learning, and I'm comfortable with that. Too many people think they should know, and that's just not possible, particularly with a new virus. So the second thing I'd say about vaccines is we have this belief nowadays that a vaccine means no more illness or nothing's bad going to happen. That's not what a vaccine does. A vaccine provides your body with it primes it for being able to deal better with a situation. It doesn't stop it. You can still get it. It just means that you end up in a situation where instead of the virus causing a reaction from your body, which actually ends up in your death, your body now deals with it by saying, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to go as far, and I can actually produce a response which is slightly less damaging to the body. The reason that a virus causes what it does in the body is because your body tries to eliminate the virus, and to do that, it does an awful lot of things which actually are not helpful to you as a living human being. But it's the only way of actually eliminating the virus. And so as a result, what you end up with is a number of reactions happening which do in fact cause you to feel unwell. You get hot, you shake, you feel unwell. That's not the virus doing that. That's your body trying to eliminate the virus. What a vaccine does is it says, I prime you so that instead of rushing to try and eliminate it, you're already halfway there and you only have to go another step, which is not as damaging to your body. So people believe that a vaccine somehow stops it and therefore you should have no symptoms. You will still have symptoms. They just won't be as bad.
Powerful. Thanks for sharing that. And I have noted down here, and I'll share this later, that what you do now and using these principles of being a scientist is truly amazing. I understand that you are and you have to manage uncertainty, because a business owner would never know. And I sometimes say this as well, that, well, you need to do 10 or 20 things to work out what's the one or two that works. And you could build your business on that one, but we don't know whether you will figure it out in 3 months, 9 months, or 19 months, or 19 years. I mean, hopefully earlier. But how have you then moved now? Who is your client? I understand it's startups, but do you want to tell us who is a business owner, business leader who you could help with?
Sure. So I now spend my time effectively helping So a business owner scale their business. And the reason I do that is because when I left my scientific research, as I said, I had this role where I was helping scientists in universities understand how technology could be helpful to them. And I realized that one of the things I could do was use those skills outside of the university. And I came to the conclusion, if I was going to leave this field, I was going to leave and do something completely different to what I'd been doing before. And I left and I started a small business. Now, this was one of the other times when I realized that I was well and truly out of my depth, hugely damaging. And being a small business owner, being somebody who starts off that, you do find yourself humongous. Well, I found myself very challenged. My self-esteem, my self-worth crashed because, once again, as a scientist, I was at the very top of my field. I believed I could do anything. I understood my role in the world. I knew what I was there to do. I can go out into this business world and there are other people doing similar things, and it's no longer quite as collaborative as it was. And I had huge amounts of self-doubt, huge amounts of problems adjusting. I didn't want to reach out to people to talk to them because I just didn't know what was going to happen. It was truly awful for a while. Two things happened, one of which was, well, somebody eventually turned around and said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I'd love a conversation about it." And my immediate response was, "Oh, is that how it happens?" It's not, once again, the first time you speak to somebody, they say, "Yes, I'll buy it." You have to have lots of conversations. You have to get to know them. You have to get to trust them. Okay, now I understand what it's like. I hadn't realized that's what was going to happen. The second thing that happened is when I got to the stage where we had built that business and I sold it, my immediate response was, I can do this again. It's going to be easy. Now, it's not. So I'm helping business owners who are like that, who've got exactly the same thing. I've managed to get a small team around me. I know that I know what I know, but I don't know what I've got to do next. And the things that I talk to them about now is, okay, let me explain to you how I realized that all of those scientific principles, all of that ability to test and to put in place a plan to go from here to here can help you build a business in the way that I learned how, as a scientist coming out of science, I had to use all of those skills again to build a business. So you were saying, too many times business owners leap in and go, I'm going to do 12 different things and find out which one works. Well, you can't find out which one works if you're doing 12 things. You can only find out which one works if you do one at a time. So I talk to people now about, look, let's do an experiment. We're going to make one change and we're going to see what happens. And once you've done one change, that doesn't mean you stop. You now make change B, and then change C, and then change D. And you keep making those changes until you get optimized, which is what science was about. So it's about me learning to help them put in place all of the things that I did wrong. So I now talk to particularly business owners who are trying to grow their team or have grown a small team, and they hit what I call the entrepreneurial business glass ceiling. They've reached a stage where everything that look around them seems to be chaos. Things are breaking all the time. Things are going wrong. Nothing's working. And they realize that actually one of the problems is they haven't put in place a lot of these principles. They're actually the problem because they've grown a business and it's all around them. And they have to learn to put in place the same sort of systems scientists do, which is where you can't be at the center of it all because you stop all the process if you're the bottleneck. So I help them to understand how to put in place what is normally 5 steps in order to ensure that their business grows and becomes essentially an asset that they can leave either to the next generation, or if they want to sell it.
Wow. I'm tempted to ask, what are the 5 steps?
So the 5 steps, simple enough steps, Andre. The 5 steps are that you have to have a continuous flow of leads. And one of the things I will be happy to tell is, anybody wants this, it's free on my website, you can go and you can get a download of exactly what these things are, and they're ideal. I call it the scientific growth scale and growth accelerator cheat sheet. So what are those 5 steps? You have to have a flow of leads. You have to have that. You have to make sure that you've got processes in place for truly excellent delivery. You have to have a team management process. You must ensure that you have got what I call profit momentum, which is where you put in place all of the documentation and everything you need. And you start all of this by having a true vision. So once you've got your vision, everything else. So the first step, vision, but then you have lead flow, service delivery, you have team management and profit momentum.
I love it. Would you say that the business journey behind you, and for a lot of startups and people who are not seasoned businessmen, business could be the best personal development tool?
So I think you have to accept that owning a business isn't for everybody. It's a great way of learning. It's a great way of testing yourself. But I believe that there are people out there that are not ideal for owning a business, because there are things about owning a business which actually don't work with certain personalities and people's lifestyles. But I think even in the situation, wherever you are, you need to act in the same way. You need to embrace the change, embrace the uncertainty, and test in the same way that a business owner has to. So even if you're an individual contributor to a business, you can still embrace the challenges. You can still test different ways of doing your job in order to find the optimal way for you to do it in your situation. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with your boss. It can mean that you and the boss don't necessarily see eye to eye, but so long as you both agree that you are contributing in the way that allows you to do your best in your situation, that's good enough. A business owner has got to end up in a situation where they can get the best of everybody around them. And I do see an awful lot of business owners that haven't yet quite moved past what I call this entrepreneurial business class ceiling, which is that they've moved past the point at which they are the controlling point, and that they've become the visionary of the business. And it's that step that I took when I realized, in order to get my business, and I scaled one business to over 600 employees, that I had to become a visionary. I had to stop being the thing that kept everything going, and I had to become the visionary and let the business team run the business. And once I'd realized that, stepped into it and made that leap, then things really took off.
Amazing. And what type of person do you think is not suited to run a business? So, because you mentioned there are people who are not fit for.
So there are challenges, I think, with any business, Andre, aren't there? And you have to have, and you'll know this well, you're the doctor of self-worth. You have to have an ironclad understanding of your own self-worth. Without that ironclad understanding of your self-worth, you will rely effectively on what I call self-esteem. You'll rely on people sort of, believing somehow that you are positioned right. Self-worth is something which I think is much more intrinsic. It's much more about, let me put it this way. If you're walking down the street, if you've got great self-esteem, you know that you're walking down the street because it's the right street and everybody who's on that street is in the right place as well. If it's self-worth, you don't care who owns the street. You don't care who else is on the street. It's just the street you're walking down, and you have the confidence to walk down it without worrying. There are too many people who try and open a business who have that self-esteem. They're looking around going, who's looking at me? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing walking in the right way, down the right street? You have to have the self-worth to say, I don't care about the street. This is the street I'm supposed to be on. It might be dark, it might be full of challenges, but it's a street I'm walking down, and it's the street I'm on, and I've got the self-worth to keep walking. If you don't have that, if you are somehow challenged by your own self-esteem, if you're challenged by not being able to take on that sort of self-worth confidence, you cannot necessarily run a business. And I do come across business owners who are trying to do it from that, you know, I'm trying to do this to impress my dad, I'm trying to do this to impress my family, I'm trying to do this to impress my classmates who thought I was a numbskull at school. And those are the people that I talk to about you need to change the way in which you're running your business. We need to find a different way.
That's very insightful, and that's probably the area where I normally can.
I thought that might be something that you would identify with, Andre.
I mean, yeah, I'm wondering how we could collaborate in the future, because I have a feeling that, yeah, I believe that it's mindset and strategies that's the key to business success, and yes, probably it requires a few tests and experiments and running things and work out what works, but without that proper identity of a business from a wounded past, it will always lash back on people who run in circles. What would you say if the next 5 years went really well for you, Stuart? What would you be celebrating?
So I celebrate this. I celebrate this every day, actually, Andre. I celebrate my clients' success because, you know, for me, watching them succeed and grow a business that may at one point have been in some trouble because they had not embraced the processes, systems, ways of developing their business in order to get past the entrepreneurial business class ceiling. You know, maybe I would be celebrating business owners who now say to me, I have got a continuous flow of leads, whereas before I went from feast to famine. I celebrate business owners who turn around to me and say, I suddenly realized I was running out of cash and I didn't even know it, because they've now got profit momentum. And I celebrate business owners who turn around and say, I truly understand what this business is about. I have a vision for where it will be in 5 years' time, because they've got a vision and they're now a visionary leader. So in 5 years' time, I want to be doing the same thing.
Wow. What have I not asked? I'm wondering, like, that you would want to share on this podcast, and a message that should be reaching business owners or people who aspire to run businesses. Tell us.
So I think the message, the question I'd like you to ask is what should that person do who is currently struggling? And the answer I would give you is stop trying to do it alone. Reach out to people around you. Admit that you don't know what you've got to do next, and find the help you need to do it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean reaching out to me or reaching out to Andre for that help. It means reaching whoever you're comfortable with. But the one thing you have to do is stop believing somehow that you can do it on your own. I tried for a very long time building these businesses, and it wasn't until I realized that I couldn't continue to be at the center of it, and I couldn't know everything. And I had to re-employ all of those thought processes, all of that stuff that I did as a scientist, that I was able to break free of that and start to really scale some businesses. And I see business owners every day who are struggling on their own. And they're taking what I call the path of least assistance. And those business owners have got to let go of that path of least assistance and embrace the assistance that's all around you. Now, yeah, that can be a coffee with a friend. It can be coffee with a competitor, because there are so many competitors. And this was an important lesson to me. There were some competitors, as I say, I left a university career. I left this scientific thing where everything was largely about collaboration. I came into the world of work, and it seemed to me that businesses all around me were trying to eat my lunch. And I thought, I can't speak to my competitors. They're all after me. And then I realized that one or two of them, we were squabbling over, let's take an example of an orange. But they wanted the skin around the outside of the orange, and I wanted the flesh in the middle. So why couldn't we collaborate? There was one orange. We both wanted a bit of it. I didn't need all of it. They needed one bit of it. Why not collaborate? So I stopped seeing competitors as enemies, and I started seeing them as potential collaborators. And now, even with those people, I have 100 of other business coaches, business mentors like myself, and every single one of them, I would turn around and go, what's the problem you're having? Because I'll tell you mine. I'll tell you mine. And you know something? They've got a different view on it, and they might have a different answer. And it's all about looking at other people and saying, you might have something that I need, and I'm prepared to give up something that I have that you might need. And it's not all about a zero-sum game. Sometimes it's a win-win-win.
Oh, this is just music to my ears, because I did grow out of these wonderful, wonderful, no money involved type of collaborations where I was able to fill a mindset gap for someone, and they were able to fix my marketing, because that's what I needed at that phase of my business. And yes, you're right. And I will always remember the path of least assistance. This is
least assistance.
That's such a great phrase. And that's what it is. The lone wolf will fail for years and years. And that was me. I've got to admit that I wasn't ready. I thought it's a sign of weakness to ask for help, because maybe from childhood, maybe it's the egoistic macho, I will work it out, I can do this. And I have to say, well, it took me probably 15, 20 years. Out of that ego, my mindset shift when eventually I surrendered to someone and said, do something with me, because I'm worthless. I don't know what's going on. Anything I'm trying is just a reflection of a lack of confidence, lack of self-worth, and lack of results. So would you say business owners get ready when some of them have enough pain or suffered enough, or they are almost falling out of business because they haven't learned?
Yeah. And it was something that that causes me the most pain, if you like, Andre, and that is when business owners wait until they've reached a crisis before they do ask for help. I see so many business owners who they reach a crisis, they reach out for help. Their business is virtually unsalvageable, but I have helped them to turn it around. And then they turn around and say, I wish I'd spoken to you 2 years ago. And it's so painful at that moment. I'm glad that we're having the conversation, but I so wish that they would have had that conversation 2 years prior, because they would have saved themselves 2 years of pain, and they'd be 2 years further on. You know, I think it's a great truism, isn't it? I can't remember who it is that says it, but I think it might be an old Japanese proverb. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So don't wait until you reach the crisis. Reach out to get the help you want now, and learn all of those lessons that you will otherwise be learning through burns by just having a scold and a slight conversation with somebody. Too often business owners wait until it's far too late and then say, what can you do to sort out the problem that are all around me? And I often turn around and say, when did you first notice these problems? And they'll say, it was 3 years ago. And you think, that's 3 years, so long that you've struggled on. I thankfully, very early in my career, because I realized how deeply I was out of my depth, I reached out to somebody and went, what am I doing wrong? And they just listed it for me. And I went, what can I do to correct it? But once again, I did come from a slightly different mindset. As a scientist, I knew that I didn't know. I accepted I didn't know, and I was prepared to ask others, tell me what you know so that I can work out how to go to the next stage. It's not the sort of background that too many business owners come from.
That's so insightful, and I hope it will help a lot of business owners to really stop the struggle and reach out for help and play teamwork. It saves pain, saves the business, saves their marriage, saves
so much.
It's much more on the line. Would you agree?
It is, absolutely it is, and so important.
Stuart, thank you very much. It was an amazing interview, and I hope we will continue this conversation. I believe it would be absolutely life changer for millions and millions of struggling people who are trying to jump out of work from the workforce, or who have been burning themselves out, burning their money, burning their time, and burning all areas of life just to make that business running. Thanks very much, and see you soon.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you very much for having me.